Now, that paper that I referred to, done by this team that attended my office, was prepared several months ago, and I must confess that I had forgotten some of what it contained when I drew it out again to help in preparing this paper. I was astonished then to find how well it fitted with the concerns. That, by the way, is an entrepreneurship training workshop for former combatants done at the Rehabilitation Center. This paper fitted in well with the concerns raised time and again in the Divisional Secretariat Reconciliation Committees that we have established in the last few months. As those who read my columns on the meetings of these committees will realize, but I should note that I know hardly anyone reads anything positive anymore, the main concerns raised by Grama Nidadharis and rural development societies relate to transport and agricultural problems, including irrigation requirements, and the need to improve medical and educational facilities. Some concerns not addressed in the above suggestions, which could easily be met by expansion of the services proposed, are through high-level vocational training. I was asked for training in marketing, given the age-old practice otherwise in rural Sri Lanka throughout this country of farmers being exploited in times of abundant harvest, while requests for expertise in value addition plus microcredit to set up agribusiness projects was also advanced. The latter I have adverted to already, while the training and support to establish cooperatives could easily be provided not necessarily by the military, but through organizations promoted and trained by the military. This would not amount to militarization, for there exists a civilian institute which could readily set up appropriate mechanisms under civilian administration and pedagogical leadership. I refer to the Kotalavela Defence University, which in the last few years began a number of academic courses which are more professionally run than in other universities in Sri Lanka, which suffer from both political upheavals and political interference, as anyone reading the papers of the last 2 weeks would have realized. There is no reason whatsoever why the KDU should not pioneer that higher level vocational and technical training, leading even to degrees if sufficient soft skills were included, that our system of tertiary training so badly needs. I was delighted, for instance, to find that the police in the Wani had instituted, with German support, training in counseling, stepping in to fill a breach that our traditional education systems have ignored. This, along with physiotherapy, as noted in the initial proposal, could be provided through diploma courses conducted by civilians but under KDU administration. I see no other way of responding swiftly to the psychosocial needs that have not been properly addressed in the last few years. And I should note that this will necessarily apply also to servicemen in the South as they adjust to civilian conditions throughout the country. Areas not seen as problematic, but which were of great interest when the subject was broached at reconciliation meetings, were those of sports and entertainment, since facilities for these are poor in areas recently resettled. The input of the forces and the police in particular to sports training that occurs now is much appreciated, but it would be even more beneficial if assistance in setting up structures to promote these were made available, including support in building up sports grounds and cultural centers. We have advocated setting up committees for social and cultural activities in Grama Nidadhari divisions, and while such civilian committees should make the decisions, in early stages they will be benefited by the organizational support as well as the advice from those with greater familiarity with activities in these areas. The military could also contribute to physical needs, and I am sorry that this has not been done more coherently, as opposed to immediately after the end of the conflict, when they really did the bulk of the work with regard to water supplies and basic road construction. When a more structured approach was instituted, concentration was necessarily on the bigger projects. Though the impact of these is understood and appreciated, more attention could also have been paid to small-scale work through local organizations, assisted for both engineering and construction by military expertise. I should note that such programs should be undertaken in collaboration with local authorities and under their supervision, but the military structure will help to make the work more efficient and more swiftly responsive to particular needs, as was so graphically illustrated yesterday in the account we heard of what happened in Pakistan, when you had such terrible physical collapse, and clearly the military had to perform the major role. All this, of course, would be even more appreciated if we worked more swiftly to making the forces multi-ethnic. Much has been done in this respect as regards the police. The complaints that were common 2 years ago about there being no one who understood Tamil in police stations are now forgotten in the north, with the rapid recruitment of Tamil-speaking officers. But more could be done, and also efforts to ensure that many more Sinhala-speaking policemen become functionally bilingual. This has happened as the more enterprising learn from their colleagues, but not to a sufficient extent. At the very least, to help things along, conversation classes could be set up in schools so that the police can learn Tamil while teaching Sinhala to anyone who wants it, and there is a great demand for this, which the Government Education Service has not been able to fulfill because there aren't enough trained teachers. But for conversation classes, you don't need trained teachers. With the army, recruitment has been slower, and this is an area in which much more needs to be done. Cadet battalions have now been set up in many northern schools, but this could have been done earlier and should be promoted on a larger scale in the east as well. And there should be more careful planning to promote integration, perhaps through twinning of schools for this purpose, and competitions which ensure regional mixing in the teams that participate. I should note that the scheme instituted some years back, even in the middle of the war, by the Secretary of Defense to recruit potential English teachers of all communities as cadet masters, which was an excellent method of achieving two objectives together, has, I'm afraid, been held up for the moment, partly because of the Ministry of Education resistance to innovative activities. Not only to overcome this problem, it would make sense, given the complaint one hears that insufficient qualified students apply for the forces, including the police, to establish feeder academies, as the British, for instance, did in the 19th century, when they needed to broad-base their army, and in particular their officer cadre, to have a very different social mix than had obtained previously in the British Army. It is vital, after all, for Tamils and Tamil-speaking youngsters to be represented adequately in the officer cadre too, and for this systematic preparation is needed. While former combatants could also be treated for some careers, it is vital to develop amongst youngsters in schools now a sense that the forces belong to the nation and not to any particular community, and that they can aspire to join without diffidence. I should add that, were such academies to concentrate on the 3 languages plus IT and sports and vocational subjects, they would give to a large number, and not necessarily only to those keen to join the forces, the paper qualifications needed for productive employment in government as well as abroad. Recently I was asking in the Mullaitivu district about the police, and the police, who were very keen on this, the senior leadership, said many of those who applied did not have the basic O-level qualifications needed. They said some of those who applied had A-levels, because as you know, the LTT, neglecting education in the area, although we paid for it, allowed a very few to go on to higher levels, but completely cut down the average training for the 12 to 16-year-olds to get them O-levels. And we can easily step into that with a novel method of catch-up education that leaves out the bulk of stuff that will not be useful, but concentrate on what is job-oriented. I have dealt hitherto with those aspects which, in the draft National Reconciliation Policy prepared in my office, were referred to as recovery and equitable development, getting right the balance that had been upset, first by measures that seemed to hijack the state for the benefit of the majority, and then the damage to land and body and soul resulting from the need to eliminate terrorism. But as we have noted there, we must also increase political participation and administrative accountability, whilst also seeking justice and truth and understanding. The role of the forces is less important here, but I believe it is necessary to combat a myth propagated by those who are opposed to reconciliation and still pursue a separatist agenda, that reconciliation is impossible without retribution. This flies in the face of all evidence, and the most obvious case, of course, is Northern Ireland, where there has been no question of investigation of terrorist activities, and I think rightly so. The term used is accountability, but while the uncertainty of those on all sides who have lost their loved ones must be appreciated and assuaged as possible, this cannot be accompanied by witch hunts. I believe government has moved in the right direction in this respect. It's changing its earlier view that 3 of the 7 categories into which former LTT combatants were divided might be prosecuted. When they were first taken into custody, the view was they were divided into A, B, C, D, E, F, G. G was released almost immediately. D, E, F, it was planned, would be released soon. The idea was A, B, C would probably be charged. Before long, government realized that B and C also needed to be released because they were not at moral fault. Only those in the first category, I believe, and a few of them, still remain for further investigation and possible indictment. And similarly, many of those held in detention during the course of the war have been released, while others are undergoing rehabilitation. Some members of the TNA indeed have complained about this on the grounds that former combatants are being treated better than comparatively innocent victims of the war. But I believe such criticisms are wrong-headed, given that we must accept that the brutalization many of them underwent was not their fault. All those who connived at conscription, the active apologists for the LTT, the international agencies working in the one who did not denounce conscription, or indeed even inform government of what happened, until the Norwegian ambassador actually described to us officially the actual situation. Even UNICEF, which lamely sought to excuse conscription of those aged 17 on the grounds that LTT legislation, as the head of the UNICEF termed the authoritarianism of terrorists, allowed that. Such people seem to be more culpable than the poor youngsters like these who were turned into killing machines. They deserve our forgiveness and our affection. The people who connived at conscription are really much more guilty, and I think we should hold them accountable. And I have told the UN they should investigate the actions of UNICEF, which actually excused the conscription of people aged 17, which I found absolutely disgusting. I would certainly be against protracted investigation of these former combatants to try to charge them, though we cannot ignore deliberate terrorist acts. In the case of our own armed forces, we must have higher standards, and that is why where prima facie cases are made, we must investigate and indict where evidence is available. But to assume that reconciliation depends on this is to fly in the face of all international experience with regard to countries recovering from internal conflict as well as justice. Conversely, we must move forward quickly on certification and on ensuring that claims with regard to lands and inheritance are swiftly dealt with. We know that there will be conflicting claims about land, which is why the Law Commission was asked several years ago to recommend mechanisms to avoid injustice as a result of prescriptive rights that could be asserted. Unfortunately, the required amendments have taken time, but I hope that these too will be passed quickly and allocations made with due compensation too for those who have reason based on long occupation for their claims. At the same time, the suffering of those driven out many years ago, in particular the Muslims of the North, must be addressed expeditiously. Finally, while this is not the place to discuss political reforms, I should note again the principles that should govern these, namely empowerment of the people and accountability towards them. For this, we must make sure that our systems of government are more coherent. I've written about this at length in a paper on emerging challenges of governance, to be presented next week at a conference arranged by an Indian and Sri Lankan think tanks. And I hope this will be the precursor to more seriousness on the part of Sri Lankan purported think tanks, which are nothing like as constructive as their Indian counterparts, or indeed counterparts anywhere else in the world. Preparing papers for policy development has not been a practice in Sri Lanka which needs to be remedied. It is ultimately on the manner in which we govern ourselves that the pluralistic prosperity of this country will depend. For this, we need better organization and better training, and I believe the manner in which the forces have developed those aspects can be a model for all of us. Thank you.